Hey guys, Ryan Earnhardt here from CreativeSoundLab.tv. Well, today we're going to be talking about comparing the low end, the mid-range, and the highs of a mix that I'm working on versus a reference track that I have. Now, this is super practical. Once I heard of this idea, it was actually super easy to remember, and in fact, I couldn't believe that I didn't do this earlier. But the idea is to just take an EQ and put it after the reference mix, and then that way you can actually listen to certain zones of the song. Now, I don't want to just leave it at that, because we're going to find out today that this actually exposes some key differences between my mix and my reference mix. For example, if my bass guitar sits in a different place, we can clearly hear that. Or if our mid-range is different, say in the guitars, we can clearly hear that. So this technique is not just something you can use to get the low end right, but it's also to reflect on individual sounds and how those individual sounds contribute to the whole vibe of the mix. So this one's going to be a good one. Stick around. So this technique was inspired by David. He was talking to me on the phone, and I realized how simple this technique was, and it's actually really powerful. Now, for me, I'm familiar with certain frequencies, but not everybody is. And so I may know how to pick out, let's say, 1K, but a lot of people may struggle to hear exactly what that is. So this helps to really zero in on certain frequencies. For example, the fullness of the snare, the bite of a guitar solo, the subs and, say, the lows of a kick drum, so we can really focus on key elements. And in fact, that's where the technique is mostly featured, is a technique to get the low end correct. And that it is. It is actually a great technique for that. But I'd like to take it a step further and kind of scoot the EQ around to various places and really take a look at different sources and to see what it exposes on my mix versus my reference tracks. So kind of a few ground rules to really make this technique work is you have to level match. I mean, it's just not a fair comparison if you don't match the levels. And what I've done is I've used a VU meter. I actually have one behind the screen here. And it's something that I can constantly reference as I'm listening to music. So as I put up music from the internet, I have Deezer to listen to high quality audio files, and actually use the in-player volume control. And I'll look at my VU meter and I'll actually match it up. And then I'll set my monitor controller at the exact same spot so that I'm listening at the same volume. In fact, I actually have a dB meter like behind the screen as well. So I'm able to get a consistent listening volume. And when I do that, and when I jump from song to song, it really sticks out. Wow, like this mix has tons of mids, or this mix has tons of lows. It's really hard to judge. And there's been so many different trends of, not very much low end versus a lot of low end versus tons of mids. You really have to level match in order to learn what you're hearing. You'd be surprised how good your ears can get. You just have to level match. The second thing is that you need to put both things, your mix and your reference, through the same EQ. So here, this is after my stereo bus processing. Then I have both, whether it's my mix or the reference, they both go through the same EQ. So, you could do this with maybe a track on your DAW, where you have the reference mix on a track, and it goes straight to the stereo bus, and maybe your mix goes to like a pre-master bus, and that's where you do your stereo bus processing, and then your master channel is basically, it's just there to kind of control what goes out to your monitors. And that's how I have this set up. I have it set up to where I'm not processing my reference track with my stereo bus compressor. Make sure you don't do that. So I've done a mix. I actually haven't done it to a reference track. I've been kind of flying blind to see how close I get. It probably would have been better off to actually, reference the reference track as I'm mixing, because there's some big differences here. But yeah, it's actually, it's pretty cool to see the difference here. So I have the adapter comparison, like the AB, and you hit this button and it kicks off a section of your reference track. You can go back and forth between your track and a reference track or many reference tracks. So this is after all my stereo bus processing, compression, any of that. Because this is like kind of like a player in itself. I don't want to put this through my stereo bus compression, basically. So it's after the stereo bus compressor. And then I have a VU meter, and that's just set up to kind of give me an idea on the levels. Of course, I'm going to be using my ears, but I want to be able to show you guys what's going on. I'm going to kind of shrink this down, and we have our EQ. And, we can really use this to our advantage. We can use this to go to the lows, mids, highs. So let's just have a listen at first and take it from there.
She never quite says what we both know. She's scared of the silence. She paces the room and I follow. I ask her what's wrong, dear. She don't say a word, and so I go.
Okay, here's the Alabama Shake song.
You just give me all your love. When you in my mama life, you just give me all your love.
Okay, so, we can hear the difference already. Lots of different top end here. But let's go ahead and dive into the technique here that I really want to show you. So first up, we got to show the bass, right? The low end, let's check it out. Okay, so some obvious differences. It's almost like I have content down here, but Alabama Shake song has nothing. I mean, it's just sub lows. So I'm gonna make it a little wider here. So, right away, we can hear that there's actually some guitars down that low. The bass sits a bit higher. It's like the whole song and the low end sits a little higher, but the guitars go down low as well. It's kind of weird. I'll have to check out the mid-range here and see how those guitars kind of fit in. Because I thought they were really, really high and almost thin, but maybe I'm wrong. Okay, let's make it a bit more narrow. Let's focus on this kind of range here. It's interesting because there's actually more like 4 and 5K in my mix, and it's almost like a scooped sound in the reference track. There's some really interesting differences here. And I don't think that you should go down the road and like chase every little EQ dip and stuff and try to emulate everything. But let's take the bass guitar, for example. That I know is very different between our two mixes. So, right away, we can hear that the bass is blending into the guitars a lot more in my reference mix. It's not doing it in mine. I mean, mine is separate from the guitars. It's really interesting. It's not just about the amount of a certain area or a certain frequency, the amount of low end, the amount of high end, but it's actually examining how pieces are working together in that mix. It's a really cool learning tool. Let's check out the kick drum. I'm curious about that. Yeah, so there's some really deep subs that you can hear have been added in. And I think that's probably something like like a sub bass kind of synthesizer where you just kind of sneak it in just a little bit. Man, it's very interesting because at first glance, I mean, you think of the Alabama Shakes, you don't think of having like 35, 40 hertz, right? But I think that's very interesting because when you're really focused on it, you can actually hear like there's some deeper stuff in this mix than there is in mine, although mine sounds more bass heavy. Well, it's pretty interesting. So, I think that one more comparison would be like right down the middle, kind of like a telephone approach. Not exactly, maybe a little wider than a telephone, right? But you're like 200 hertz to 5K.
She never quite says what we both know. She's scared of the silence. She paces the room and I follow. Much is going on, but you can always come around. Is going on. No.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. I mean, you can hear all sorts of weird phasing. It sounds like it's almost like with the reference track, it's like a harmonica amp kind of sound, kind of phasey. It's not stuff you notice unless you go back and forth a lot. It's really interesting to hear how those guitars blend in with the bass, even though they got that really sharp bite at the top end. So yeah, this has been really interesting. I haven't done a whole lot of this, and in fact, this adapter plugin, it actually has an EQ built in. But the problem is this, I don't know, this just doesn't sound very good. It's like, it's just not a whole lot of volume, and you get a lot more control when you use your own EQ, and you put it after so that both things are going through it. And I mean, it just works great. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Again, check out that free mix event this Friday. with David Glenn. I'll be there hanging out in the chat. If you want to sign up, it's totally free. It's with the link in the description below. Okay, talk to you soon.